Welcome back to a Book a Day podcast. As you know, this week we are discussing books on nature. And since this podcast comes to you from the Himalayas, I thought about discussing Ruskin Bond's books and one book in particular. The book is called The Book of Nature. Well, so appropriate this title. And as for those, especially those who are outside India and are not familiar with the name Ruskin Bond, let me tell you that if there is one writer you would want to read to understand the life in the Himalayas, especially Himalayan countryside, then you need to read him. He's written so many books, short stories, essays, poems, and what he does is he doesn't really talk about nature in a distant way, but in his stories, in his writings, you make this intimate, this familiar human connection with nature. You feel that you're there in the Himalayas, you are experiencing the life there, the life in the Himalayan villages. I have previously talked about some of his books. For example, one of my favorite is Rain in the Mountains, where he records his life in Mussoorie and nearby smaller hill stations, and then he describes how the weather changes in the mountains, how the rains come in. Then there are other popular books. In fact, one particular book called Our Trees Still Grow in Dera. It's got Sahitya Academy Award also for this for the book, and you'll be filled with nostalgia for the life that was once there in this town of Dehradun. And in most of his writings, he refers to Dehradun as Dera. And you go back in time, you connect with nature, and especially the way it was when he was growing up. That's also very much the theme here in this particular book that I'm going to talk about, the Book of Nature, where he goes back to his childhood, goes back in time, and just makes you see the nature and experience it very closely. I think more than his stories or anything, his memoir or his personal writings, where he's just describing the life in the Himalayas, that's probably the best part about Ruskin Bond's writing. Those specific books and essays, I think, are really valuable. So, coming back to this book that I'm going to be discussing today, the Book of Nature. It's a wonderful collection. Once again, it's a collection of Ruskin Bond's writings about the natural world. And although he's just a writer, he's not a naturalist, but the way he writes about it, the details about the plants and animals, all those things, natural elements, just makes you feel, makes you wonder if he's a naturalist. And as a writer, I feel really inspired by the kind of details he puts into the nature, goes into every small detail of it. The way he notices the nature, the way he notices even the smallest of insects, even every plant or tree he's noticing, he's writing about it. I really feel inspired. And in this particular book also, he has separate chapters dedicated for one, for example, for trees, another one for flowers. There's one particular section which talks about big cattails that is dedicated to leopards and tigers. So a lot of detailing about the forests, about the life in the wilderness that goes on there. But what I want to read first for you is something that takes us back to Ruskin Bond's childhood. Remember, that was many decades ago. That was before the independence of India. It was still the British India. And of course, the nature was very different back then. It was quite rich. The town of Dehradun that he describes in his writings here, uh, you can't recognize it today. But that's really the point here. We want to visit those places by reading a book and experience as they used to be. So let me read a particular section for you from the book, and the chapter is called Grandfather's Zoo, where he's talking about the gardens they used to have in the houses back then. There was a lot of space, and sometimes you'll get some experience of wilderness in the birds, butterflies, squirrels, reptiles, all sorts of things would be there. So let me read these passages from the book for you, where he is describing the garden adventures and how life was back then in Dehradun, or Dera as he refers to it. Here we go. Though the house and grounds of our home in Dera were grandfather's domain, where he kept an odd assortment of pets, the magnificent old banyan tree was mine, chiefly because grandfather, at the age of 65, could no longer climb it. Grandmother used to tease him about this and would speak of a certain Countess of Desmond, an Englishwoman who lived to the age of 117 and would have lived longer if she had not fallen while climbing an apple tree. The spreading branches of the banyan tree, which curved to the ground and took root again, forming a maze of arches, gave me endless pleasure. The tree was older than the house, older than grandfather, as old as the town of Dera, nestling in the valley at the foot of the Himalayas. My first friend and familiar was a small grey squirrel. Arching his back and sniffing into the air, he seemed at first to resent my invasion of his privacy. But when he found that I did not arm myself with a catapult or air gun, he became friendlier. And when I started leaving him pieces of cake and biscuit, he grew bolder and finally became familiar enough to take food from my hands. Before long, he was delving into my pockets and helping myself to whatever he could find. He was a very young squirrel, and his friends and relatives probably thought him headstrong and foolish for trusting a human. In the spring, when the banyan tree was full of small red figs, birds of all kinds would flock into its branches, the red bottomed bulbul, cheerful and greedy, gossiping rosy pastors, and parrots and crows squabbling with each other all the time. During the fig season, the banyan tree was the noisiest place on the road. Halfway up the tree, I had built a small platform on which I would often spend the afternoons when it wasn't too hot. I could read there, propping myself up against the bole of the tree with the cushions taken from the drawing room. Treasure Island, Huck Finn, the Mowgli stories, and detective novels made up my bag of very mixed reading. When I didn't want to read, I could look down through the banyan leaves at the world below, at grandmother hanging up or taking down the washing, at the cook quarreling with a fruit vendor, or at grandfather grumbling at the hardy Indian marigold, which insisted on springing up all over his very English garden. Usually, nothing very exciting happened while I was in the banyan tree, but on one particular afternoon, I had enough excitement to last me through the summer. That was the time I saw a mongoose and a cobra fight to death in the garden, while I sat directly above them in the banyan tree. It was an April afternoon. The warm breezes of approaching summer had sent everyone, including grandfather, indoors. I was feeling drowsy myself and was wondering if I should go to the pond behind the house for a swim when I saw a huge black cobra gliding out of a clump of cacti and making for some cooler part of the garden. At the same time, a mongoose emerged from the bushes and went straight for the cobra. In a clearing beneath the tree, in bright sunshine, they came face to face. The cobra knew only too well that the grey mongoose, 3 feet long, was a superb fighter, clever and aggressive. But the cobra was a skillful and experienced fighter too. He could move swiftly and strike with the speed of light, and the sacs behind his long, sharp fangs were full of deadly venom. It was to be a battle of champions. Hissing defiance, his forked tongue darting in and out, the cobra raised 3 of his 6 feet off the ground and spread his broad, spectacled hood. The mongoose bushed his tail. The long hair on his spine stood up. Though the combatants were unaware of my presence in the banyan tree, they soon became aware of the arrival of 2 other spectators. One was a myna and the other a jungle crow. They had seen these preparations for battle and had settled on the cactus to watch the outcome. Had they been content only to watch, all would have been well with both of them. The cobra stood on the defensive, swaying slowly from side to side, trying to mesmerize the mongoose into making a false move. The mongoose knew the power of his opponent's glassy, twinkling eyes and refused to meet them. Instead, he fixed his gaze at a point just below the cobra's hood and opened the attack. Moving forward quickly until he was just within the cobra's reach, he made a feint to one side. Immediately, the cobra struck. His great hood came down so swiftly that I thought nothing could save the mongoose. But the little fellow jumped neatly to one side and darted in as swiftly as the cobra, biting the snake on the back and darting away again out of reach. The moment the cobra struck, the crow and the myna hurled themselves at him, only to collide heavily in midair. Shrieking at each other, they turned to the cactus plant. A few drops of blood glistened on the cobra's back. The cobra struck again and missed. Again the mongoose sprang aside, jumped in and bit. Again the birds dived at the snake, bumped into each other instead, and returned shrieking to the safety of the cactus. The third round followed the same course as the first, but with one dramatic difference. The crow and the myna, still determined to take part in the proceedings, dived at the cobra, but this time they missed each other as well as their mark. The myna flew on and reached its perch, but the crow tried to pull up in midair and turned back. In the second that it took him to do this, the cobra whipped his head back and struck with great force, his snout thudding against the crow's body. I saw the bird flung nearly 20 feet across the garden, where, after fluttering about for a while, it lay still. The myna remained on the cactus plant, and when the snake and the mongoose returned to the fray, it very wisely refrained from interfering again. The cobra was weakening, and the mongoose, walking fearlessly up to it, raised himself on his short legs and with a lightning snap had the big snake by the snout. The cobra writhed and lashed about in a frightening manner, and even coiled itself about the mongoose, but all to no avail. The little fellow hung grimly on until the snake had ceased to struggle. He then smeared along its quivering length, gripping it round the hood and dragging it into the bushes. The mena dropped cautiously to the ground, hopped about, peered into the bushes from a safe distance, and then, with a shrill cry of congratulations, flew away. So that was one story from his childhood, Ruskin Bond's childhood, that is, where he's talking about the nature and how the wildlife was dancing right in front of your eyes. Today, I don't think you can experience that at your house in Dehradun at least. In fact, in most places in India, you cannot experience that. The nature is just too far away from you. And as I said previously, there are specific chapters on trees, on flowers, on wilderness, and you feel so intimately close to nature when you read Ruskin Bond's writings. And I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to take you closer to nature by reading specific passages, a couple of passages I'll read, one from this particular chapter called Trees, and I hope you will enjoy it. Let me read it for you now. The trees stand watch over my day to day life. They are the guardians of my conscience. I have no one else to answer to, so I live and work under the generous but highly principled supervision of the trees, especially the deodars, who stand on guard unbending on the slope above the cottage. The oak and maples are a little more tolerant. They have had to put up with a great deal, their branches continually lopped for fuel and fodder. What would they think? I ask myself on many occasions. What would they like me to do? And I do what I think they would approve of most. Well, it's nice to have someone to turn to. The leaves are a fresh pale green in the spring rain. I can look at the trees from my window, look down on them almost because the window is on the first floor of the cottage and the hillside runs at a sharp angle into the ravine. I do nearly all my writing at this window seat. Whenever I look up, the trees remind me that they are there. They are my best critics. As long as I am aware of their presence, I can try to avoid the trivial and the banal. So that was a little passage from the chapter on trees, and you can see how much he likes them. Particularly, he likes, right from his childhood, as mentioned earlier, the banyan tree. That seems particularly close to him. And why not when you have spent time with the banyan trees as a child, when you've climbed on them, you would know how much pleasure it is. And then there is this chapter on rain, and I think it should be there because anyone who is writing on the Himalayas has to include how the season of monsoon is in the Himalayas. So let me read a passage from this particular chapter, which is on rains, and I hope you'll enjoy it again. Dust. It blew up in great clouds, swirling down the road, clutching and clinging to everything it touched, burning, choking, stinging dust, then thunder. The wind dropped suddenly. There was a hushed expectancy in the air, and then out of the dust came big black rumbling clouds. Something was happening. At first, there was a lonely drop of water on the windowsill, then a patter on the roof. Rusty felt a thrill of anticipation and a mountain of excitement. The rains had come to break the monotony of the summer months. The monsoon had arrived. The sky shuddered, the clouds groaned, a fork of lightning struck across the sky, and then the sky itself exploded. The rain poured down, drumming on the corrugated roof. Rusty's vision was reduced to about 20 yards. It was as though the room had been cut off from the rest of the world by an impenetrable wall of water. The rains had arrived, and Rusty wanted to experience to the full the novelty of that first shower. He threw off his clothes and ran naked onto the roof, and the wind sprang up and whipped the water across his body so that he writhed in ecstasy. The rain was more intoxicating than the alcohol, and it was with difficulty that he restrained himself from shouting and dancing in mad abandon. The force and freshness of the rain brought tremendous relief, washed away the stagnation that had been settling on him, poisoning his mind and body. The rain swept over the town, cleansing the sky and the earth. The trees bent beneath the force of wind and water. The field was a bog, flowers flattened to the ground. Rusty returned to the room, exhilarated, his body weeping. He was confronted by a flood. The water had come in through the door and the window and the skylight, and the floor was flooded ankle deep. He took to his bed. So that was the passage on rains. In case you're wondering who is this Rusty, well, this is the protagonist of the book. In fact, the first book written by Ruskin Bond called The Room on the Roof. It was written, I think, over 60 years ago, probably around 60 years ago. And at that time, it received a lot of popularity as well as appreciation. It's a wonderful book. And in many ways, it feels like it reflects Ruskin Bond's own life as a young boy when he was there. And that's what happened to him. He grew up in the mountains and he moved out to England briefly and he came back. So with that, I will take your leave, and I just hope that you will get a chance to explore the nature as described by Ruskin Bond is in his writings on Himalayas. Thank you very much for listening, and I will catch you the next time in the next episode with another book on nature. So I'll catch you then. Thank you very much.